Have you ever wondered why some people seem to glide through life with an unshakable inner peace, never losing their temper, never getting rattled by other people's behavior, while others explode at the slightest provocation? Why can some individuals remain calm when someone cuts them off in traffic, insults them publicly, or betrays their trust, while others carry anger and resentment for days, weeks, or even years? The answer isn't found in genetics, luck, or special circumstances. It lies in understanding and applying ancient wisdom that has been tested by some of history's greatest leaders and thinkers. Today, we're diving deep into the Stoic teachings that can completely transform your relationship with anger and irritation forever. Welcome back to Stoic Mentality, where we explore the practical wisdom of ancient philosophy to solve modern problems. I'm your host, and today we're going to uncover the secret that Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the ancient world, used to maintain his composure even when facing betrayal, war, and personal tragedy. We'll discover how Epictetus, who was born into slavery and suffered physical disabilities, developed such inner freedom that he could teach others about liberation. We'll learn from Seneca, who navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics, how to remain unperturbed by other people's opinions and actions. But this isn't just ancient philosophy. This is practical psychology that can be applied immediately to your modern life. If you've ever lost sleep replaying an argument in your head, if you've ever felt your blood pressure rise because of someone else's behavior, if you've ever said or done something in anger that you later regretted, then this video is specifically designed for you. What you're about to learn isn't just anger management, it's anger transformation. By the end of this video, you'll understand why most people suffer unnecessarily from the actions and words of others. And more importantly, you'll have the tools to ensure that you never have to suffer this way again. But I need you to stay until the end, because the most powerful technique comes in the final minutes, and it's something that most people never discover. The root of all anger, why your brain creates suffering. Let's start with a fundamental truth that most people never realize. Anger is never caused by other people's actions. I know this might sound controversial, especially when someone has genuinely wronged you. But stay with me, because understanding this principle will set you free from a lifetime of unnecessary suffering. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who knew suffering better than most, taught his students, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. But he went even deeper than that. He explained that between any external event and your emotional response, there's always a middle step that most people are completely unaware of: your interpretation of that event. Think about this carefully. When someone cuts you off in traffic, the objective event is simply a vehicle changed lanes in front of my vehicle. That's it. Everything else, the story about disrespect, the assumption about their character, the meaning you attach to their action, that's all added by your mind. And it's that addition, not the original event, that creates your anger. Here's a simple but powerful experiment to prove this to yourself. Imagine you're walking down the street and someone bumps into you without apologizing. Your immediate reaction might be irritation or anger. But what if you later discovered that person was rushing to the hospital because their child had been in an accident? Suddenly the same physical event, being bumped into, no longer seems worthy of anger. Nothing changed about what happened to you, but everything changed about your interpretation of why it happened. This reveals something profound. If the same event can produce completely different emotional responses depending on your interpretation, then the event itself has no inherent power to make you angry. The power lies entirely in how you choose to interpret and respond to the event. Marcus Aurelius, who had every reason to be angry at the countless people who betrayed him, plotted against him, and disappointed him, wrote in his personal journal, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." These weren't pretty words written by someone living in an ivory tower. These were hard-won insights from a man who faced some of the most challenging circumstances any human being could face. The stories we tell ourselves. Every time someone does something that bothers you, your mind immediately starts creating a story about their motivations, their character, and what their action means about you. These stories happen so quickly and automatically that you don't even notice you're creating them, but they determine your entire emotional response. When your coworker gets the promotion you wanted, your mind might create the story, "They don't appreciate my hard work. This company is unfair. I'm not valued here. That person doesn't deserve it as much as I do." None of these interpretations are facts, they're stories. And it's these stories, not the actual event of someone else getting promoted, that create your anger and resentment. The Stoics discovered that most human suffering comes from confusing our stories about events with the events themselves. We react not to reality, but to our narrative about reality. And since we're the authors of these narratives, we have complete power to change them. But here's what's truly liberating. When you realize you're creating these stories, you can start choosing consciously what stories to tell yourself. Instead of automatically assuming the worst about someone's motivations, you can choose to consider alternative explanations that don't trigger anger. Instead of making their behavior about you, you can recognize that their actions usually have nothing to do with you and everything to do with their own internal struggles. This doesn't mean becoming naive or failing to recognize genuine problems. It means distinguishing between what actually happened and the meaning you're adding to what happened. It means responding to facts rather than reacting to interpretations. The first key to freedom, understanding the dichotomy of control, the foundation of Stoic wisdom, and the first key to never feeling angry again, is understanding what the Stoics called the dichotomy of control. This principle alone can eliminate about 90% of your daily frustrations and irritations, but most people never truly grasp its power. Epictetus taught that some things are within our control, and some things are not. The things within our control are incredibly limited, but absolutely powerful. Our thoughts, our actions, and our responses. Everything else, literally everything else, is outside our direct control. Other people's behavior, their opinions about you, the weather, traffic, politics, the past, the future, none of these are within your control. Now, here's the crucial insight that transforms anger into peace. Every time you get angry about something, you're essentially trying to control something that's outside your control. You're attempting to force reality to match your preferences, rather than adapting your response to match reality. When someone is rude to you, you can't control their rudeness. It already happened. When someone doesn't appreciate your efforts, you can't force them to appreciate you. When someone treats you unfairly, you can't control their sense of fairness. All of these are outside your sphere of influence, which means anger about them is not just useless, it's actively harmful to you. But here's what you can control in every situation: how you interpret what happened, how you choose to respond, and what lessons you extract from the experience. You can control whether you let someone else's poor behavior lower your own standards. You can control whether you waste your precious mental energy on things you can't change, or invest it in things you can improve. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily. Despite being the most powerful man in his world, he regularly reminded himself in his journal that he couldn't control other people's actions, only his own responses to them. You have power over your mind, not outside events, he wrote. This wasn't philosophical theory for him, it was practical necessity. As emperor, he dealt with constant betrayals, military threats, political intrigue, and personal losses. If he had tried to control all these external factors, he would have driven himself insane. The energy audit. Here's a practical exercise that can revolutionize your daily experience. Conduct an energy audit on your anger and irritation. For 1 week, every time you feel bothered by someone or something, ask yourself this simple question: is this within my control? If the answer is no, and it will be no about 95% of the time, you have a choice. You can either continue wasting your energy trying to control the uncontrollable, or you can redirect that energy towards something you can actually influence. You can choose to be angry about traffic jams, or you can use that time to listen to educational content. You can choose to be frustrated by your co-worker's attitude, or you can focus on maintaining your own professional standards. This isn't about becoming passive or accepting injustice. It's about becoming strategic with your energy and attention. When you stop wasting mental and emotional resources on things you can't control, you have much more available for the things you can control, and that's where real change happens. The Stoics weren't advocating for apathy. They were advocating for intelligent action. They understood that scattered energy produces scattered results, but focused energy applied consistently to things within your control can create extraordinary outcomes. The second key to freedom, the power of perspective, the second key to eliminating anger from your life lies in developing what Marcus Aurelius called the view from above, the ability to see any situation from a broader perspective that naturally dissolves the importance we place on minor irritations and slights. Imagine you're having a heated argument with someone about something that seems incredibly important in the moment. Now imagine viewing that same argument from the perspective of someone looking back on it 10 years from now. How much will it matter then? Now imagine viewing it from the perspective of someone on their deathbed, reflecting on what was truly important in life. Finally, imagine viewing it from a cosmic perspective, from the viewpoint of someone contemplating the vastness of the universe and the brevity of human existence. This exercise isn't meant to diminish the importance of genuine issues in your life. It's meant to help you distinguish between what deserves your emotional energy and what doesn't. Most of the things that trigger our anger are temporary irritations that we've blown out of proportion because we're seeing them through the narrow lens of our immediate experience. Marcus Aurelius regularly practiced this perspective shift. He would remind himself that he was just one human being among billions, living for just a few decades in the span of eternity, on one small planet in an incomprehensibly vast universe. This wasn't depressing to him. It was liberating. It helped him focus on what truly mattered and let go of what didn't. The impermanence of everything. One of the most powerful anger-dissolving realizations is understanding the temporary nature of all human experiences. The person who's annoying you today won't always be in your life. The situation that's frustrating you now will eventually pass. Even your own life, with all its dramas and irritations, is just a brief moment in the grand scheme of existence. The Stoics had a practice called memento mori, remembering death. This wasn't morbid, it was practical. When you truly understand that your time is limited, you become much more selective about what deserves your emotional investment. That argument with your neighbor about parking spaces suddenly seems less important when you remember that both of you are temporary visitors on this planet. That workplace conflict loses its sting when you realize that in a few years, you might not even remember the details. This perspective shift doesn't make you care less about life. It makes you care more about the right things. Instead of getting angry about trivial matters, you start investing your energy in building meaningful relationships, pursuing worthwhile goals, and contributing positively to the world around you. Seneca, who faced exile, betrayal, and ultimately forced suicide, wrote, "Life is long enough if you know how to use it." He understood that we often waste our precious time and energy on things that don't deserve them, and then wonder why life feels unsatisfying. When you stop spending your life currency on anger and irritation, you have much more available for joy, growth, and meaningful contribution. The third key to freedom, understanding human nature. The third key to never feeling angry again is developing a deep understanding of human nature, why people behave the way they do, and how this understanding can free you from taking their behavior personally. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Whenever you want to cheer yourself up, Consider the good qualities of your companions, the energy and modesty of one, the generosity of another, some other fine quality of a third. Nothing cheers the heart so much as the examples of the virtues displayed by our companions. But he also understood that humans are flawed, struggling creatures who often act from their own pain, fear, and confusion. When someone is rude to you, they're usually not responding to you personally. They're responding from their own inner state of stress, fear, insecurity, or pain. When someone betrays your trust, it's typically not because they've calculated how to hurt you specifically, but because they're acting from their own limitations, fears, or misguided priorities. When someone doesn't appreciate your efforts, it's often not because your efforts aren't valuable, but because they're absorbed in their own concerns and challenges. This understanding doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it does free you from the burden of taking it personally. When you realize that most people's negative behavior has nothing to do with you and everything to do with their own internal struggles, anger naturally dissolves into something more useful, perhaps compassion, perhaps simply indifference, but not the burning resentment that destroys your own peace. The mirror of projection. Here's an insight that might be uncomfortable, but is incredibly liberating. Often what angers us most about others are the qualities we least accept in ourselves. Psychologists call this projection, but the Stoics understood this principle thousands of years ago. If someone's arrogance irritates you deeply, ask yourself honestly, are there ways you might be arrogant that you don't want to acknowledge? If someone's laziness bothers you intensely, consider whether you have your own areas of procrastination or avoidance. If someone's dishonesty triggers strong anger, reflect on whether there are ways you're not completely honest with yourself or others. This isn't about self-blame or shame. It's about using your emotional reactions as information about your own growth areas. When you start seeing your irritation with others as a mirror reflecting your own inner work, something remarkable happens. You become less focused on changing them and more focused on improving yourself. And when your attention shifts from controlling others to developing yourself, anger naturally transforms into self-awareness and growth. Epictetus taught, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. The most powerful way to influence others isn't through anger or criticism, but through becoming an example of the qualities you want to see in the world. When you embody patience, others often become more patient around you. When you demonstrate kindness, you often inspire kindness in return. When you maintain your integrity regardless of others' behavior, you create space for them to rise to a higher standard as well. The fourth key to freedom, the practice of non-attachment. Fourth key to freedom from anger involves mastering the art of non-attachment, caring deeply about people and outcomes while simultaneously holding them lightly enough that you don't suffer when they don't meet your expectations. This is one of the most misunderstood concepts in philosophy. Non-attachment doesn't mean not caring, becoming cold, or withdrawing from life. It means loving people and pursuing goals without the desperate clinging that creates suffering when things don't go as planned. Think about a time when you were extremely attached to a particular outcome. Maybe getting a specific job, winning someone's approval, or having a situation unfold exactly as you wanted. Remember the anger and frustration you felt when things didn't go according to your expectations. Now contrast that with times when you had preferences but weren't desperately attached to them. Notice how much more peaceful and clear-minded you were able to remain. The Stoics taught that we can have preferences without creating expectations. You can prefer that people treat you with respect without expecting that they will. You can prefer that your efforts be recognized without demanding recognition. You can prefer that life be easy without requiring that it be easy. This subtle shift from expectation to preference can eliminate enormous amounts of unnecessary suffering. Freedom through acceptance. Acceptance is perhaps the most misunderstood word in personal development. Most people think acceptance means giving up, becoming passive, or tolerating injustice. But true Stoic acceptance is something entirely different. It's acknowledging reality as it is so you can respond to it effectively rather than wasting energy fighting against what has already happened. When someone has already been rude to you, acceptance means acknowledging that yes, this person was rude. It doesn't mean thinking their rudeness was okay. It doesn't mean not setting boundaries. It doesn't mean allowing yourself to be mistreated in the future. It simply means not wasting your energy being angry about something that has already occurred and cannot be changed. Seneca explained this beautifully. True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future. When you're angry about past events or worried about future ones, you're missing the only moment where you actually have power, the present moment. And in the present moment, you always have the power to choose your response. This is why the Stoics focus so much on the present, not because they were unconcerned with the future, but because they understood that the present moment is where all real power resides. You can't change the past by being angry about it. You can't control the future by worrying about it. But you can influence your future by making wise choices in the present. And you can find peace by accepting what has already happened. The revolutionary mindset shift from victim to creator now. We come to perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of Stoic philosophy. The shift from seeing yourself as a victim of other people's behavior to recognizing yourself as the creator of your own experience. This isn't New Age positive thinking. This is practical psychology that has been validated by thousands of years of human experience. Most people live their lives as if they're victims of their circumstances and other people's actions. He made me angry. She ruined my day. They stressed me out. This situation is driving me crazy. Listen to the language. It's the language of powerlessness, of being at the mercy of external forces. But the Stoics discovered something profound. No one can make you feel anything without your cooperation. This might be difficult to accept initially, especially if you've experienced genuine mistreatment, but understanding this principle is the key to ultimate emotional freedom. When you realize that your emotional state is created by your interpretation of events rather than by the events themselves, you move from being a victim of circumstances to being the author of your experience. This doesn't mean you're responsible for what happens to you. Much of that is indeed outside your control, but you are completely responsible for what happens within you in response to external events. The power of choice. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor who endured unimaginable suffering in concentration camps, discovered what the Stoics had taught thousands of years earlier. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. If someone who survived the Holocaust could find the freedom to choose his response to the most extreme circumstances imaginable, what excuse do any of us have for allowing minor irritations and everyday frustrations to control our emotional state? This isn't minimizing genuine suffering or pretending that all problems are equally trivial. It's recognizing that regardless of what you're facing, you always retain the fundamental human freedom to choose your attitude and response. And in that choice lies all your power. Every moment presents you with an opportunity to exercise this freedom. When someone is rude to you, you can choose to respond with anger or with dignity. When someone disappoints you, you can choose to respond with resentment or with understanding. When life doesn't go according to your plans, you can choose to respond with bitterness or with adaptability. The extraordinary thing is that as you begin to exercise this freedom consistently, you discover that you have far more control over your life experience than you ever imagined. Not because you can control external events, but because you can control the most important thing, your response to those events. The practice of Stoic reflection, the daily examination. The Stoics understood that transformation requires consistent practice, not just intellectual understanding. They developed specific exercises to train the mind in these principles, and the most important of these was the daily examination. a regular practice of reflecting on your experiences and responses. Marcus Aurelius did this every morning and evening, and his meditations are essentially the record of this personal practice. Each morning, he would prepare himself mentally for the challenges of the day, reminding himself of Stoic principles and setting his intentions. Each evening, he would review his actions and reactions, learning from his experiences without harsh self-judgment. You can begin your own version of this practice immediately. Each morning, before engaging with the demands of your day, take a few minutes to remind yourself of the key principles. Other people's behavior is outside your control. Your response is within your control. Most things that seem urgent aren't actually important. And this day is an opportunity to practice virtue regardless of what happens. Each evening, gently review your day with curiosity rather than criticism. When did you respond with anger or irritation? What triggered those responses? How might you respond differently in similar situations? What did you handle well? Where did you demonstrate growth? What can you learn from today's experiences? This practice isn't about achieving perfection. The Stoics understood that humans are naturally flawed and that growth is a lifelong process. It's about developing increasing awareness of your automatic patterns and gradually expanding your capacity to choose your responses consciously. The discipline of perception, one of the most powerful Stoic practices, is what they called the discipline of perception. Learning to see events as they actually are, rather than through the filter of your automatic emotional reactions. Most of us don't realize that we rarely react to events themselves, but to our interpretations of those events. Someone doesn't return your phone call, and your mind immediately creates a story. They're ignoring me. They don't value our relationship. Something terrible must have happened, or they're probably talking about me behind my back. None of these interpretations are necessarily true, but they determine your emotional response. The discipline of perception involves catching these automatic interpretations and asking yourself, what actually happened here, separate from my story about what happened? In the phone call example, what actually happened is simply, person X has not yet returned my call. Everything else is interpretation. This practice might seem simple, but it's revolutionary in its effects. When you begin to distinguish consistently between facts and interpretations, you realize that most of your emotional suffering comes not from what happens to you, but from the stories you tell yourself about what happens to you. And since you're the author of those stories, you can begin to write better ones. Advanced Stoic techniques. The negative visualization. One of the most counterintuitive but powerful Stoic practices is called negative visualization, or premeditatio malorum, imagining loss or difficulty before it happens. This isn't pessimism or attracting negative outcomes. It's a form of mental preparation that reduces the shock and anger when challenges inevitably arise. Marcus Aurelius would regularly remind himself that he might lose his position, his wealth, his health, or even his life at any moment. This wasn't to create anxiety, but to reduce his attachment to these external things and increase his appreciation for them while he had them. When you've already mentally prepared for the possibility of loss, you're less likely to be devastated by it if it occurs, and more likely to be grateful for what you have while you have it. You can apply this practice to interpersonal situations that typically trigger your anger. If you're dealing with a difficult colleague, spend a few minutes imagining their worst possible behavior and mentally rehearsing how you would respond with dignity and wisdom. If you're about to have a challenging conversation, visualize various ways it could go wrong and plan your virtuous responses. This practice doesn't make you paranoid or negative. It makes you prepared and resilient. When you've already considered how you'll maintain your principles in difficult situations, you're much more likely to actually do so when those situations arise. The view from the deathbed, another powerful perspective exercise, involves imagining yourself at the end of your life, looking back on the current situation that's causing you anger or frustration. From that perspective, with the wisdom that comes from having lived a full life, how important would this current irritation seem? Would you, on your deathbed, wish you had spent more time being angry about that co-worker's attitude? Would you regret not holding on to that resentment about how someone treated you last year? Would you feel proud of the energy you invested in being irritated by other people's opinions of you? This exercise isn't meant to minimize genuine problems or important relationships. It's meant to help you distinguish between what deserves your precious life energy and what doesn't. When you realize that anger is spending your life currency on things that won't matter in the long run, you naturally become more selective about what triggers your emotional investment. From this perspective, you start to see that many of the things that consume your mental energy are simply not worthy of the brief, precious time you have on this planet. This realization naturally redirects your attention toward what truly matters, building meaningful relationships, contributing positively to the world, and becoming the best version of yourself. The transformation begins the moment of recognition. We have now reached the crucial turning point. The moment where you must decide whether these concepts will remain interesting ideas or become the tools that transform your life. Because understanding Stoic philosophy intellectually and applying it when you're actually triggered are two completely different things. The real test comes in that split second when someone has just done something that would normally make you angry. In that moment, you have a choice that will determine not just your next few minutes, but the kind of person you're becoming. You can react automatically with anger, or you can pause and choose a response that aligns with wisdom rather than impulse. This pause, this space between stimulus and response, is where your freedom lives. It's where you exercise your most fundamental human power, the ability to choose your attitude regardless of circumstances. And like any power, it grows stronger with use and weaker with neglect. The Stoics understood that this transformation doesn't happen overnight. They viewed philosophy not as an academic subject, but as a lifelong practice of becoming more wise, more virtuous, and more free. Every challenging situation becomes an opportunity to strengthen your capacity for wisdom over reactivity, peace over anger, growth over stagnation. Your first assignment. Here's your first practical assignment for the next 24 hours. Every time you feel the first stirrings of anger or irritation, pause and ask yourself 3 questions. First, is this situation within my control? If the answer is no, remind yourself that anger about it is simply wasted energy that could be better invested elsewhere. Second, how will this matter in 10 years? This question helps you distinguish between genuine issues and temporary irritations that you're magnifying beyond their actual importance. Third, how can I respond to this situation in a way that I'll be proud of later? This shifts your focus from reacting to the other person's behavior to choosing your own behavior consciously. Don't expect perfection. The goal isn't to never feel irritation again. It's to reduce the duration and intensity of that irritation, and to prevent it from controlling your actions. Even catching yourself after you've already reacted angrily is progress, because awareness is the first step toward change. The deeper transformation beyond anger management. What we've been discussing goes far beyond traditional anger management. Anger management techniques typically focus on controlling the expression of anger, counting to 10, taking deep breaths, walking away. These can be useful in the moment, but they don't address the root cause of anger, which is our interpretation of events and our attachment to outcomes we can't control. Stoic philosophy offers something much more profound: anger transformation. Instead of just managing your anger, you can actually eliminate most of it at its source by changing how you perceive and interpret the events that typically trigger it. This doesn't happen through willpower or positive thinking, but through a fundamental shift in how you understand your relationship to external events. When you truly internalize that other people's behavior reflects their own internal state rather than your worth, when you genuinely accept that you can't control outcomes, only efforts, When you really understand that most situations are temporary and less significant than they appear in the moment, anger naturally dissolves. It's not suppressed or managed. It simply becomes irrelevant. This transformation affects every area of your life. Your relationships improve because you're no longer reactive and defensive. Your work performance enhances because you can think clearly instead of being clouded by irritation. Your health improves because you're no longer constantly flooding your system with stress hormones. Your overall life satisfaction increases because you're no longer wasting mental and emotional energy on things that don't deserve it. The ripple effect. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this transformation is how it affects others. When you stop being reactive to other people's negative behavior, something interesting happens. They often stop behaving negatively around you. Not because you've controlled or changed them, but because you've removed the emotional fuel that their negativity was seeking. Many people behave badly because they're seeking a reaction, attention, control, or validation of their own internal drama. When you respond with calm dignity instead of anger, you're not giving them the reaction they're unconsciously seeking. This often causes them to either escalate briefly, testing whether you've really changed, or to gradually modify their behavior around you. Even when their behavior doesn't change, your new response creates a completely different dynamic. Instead of escalating conflicts, you become someone who de-escalates them. Instead of contributing to negative energy, you become a source of stability and wisdom. People begin to seek you out when they need calm perspective rather than emotional drama. This doesn't mean becoming passive or allowing yourself to be mistreated. It means responding to poor treatment with strength and dignity rather than with matching negativity. Sometimes this means setting clear boundaries. Sometimes it means walking away. Sometimes it means addressing issues directly but without anger. The key is that your response comes from wisdom and strength rather than from hurt and reactivity. The climax, the ultimate test. When everything goes wrong now, we come to the ultimate test of Stoic wisdom. Those moments when everything seems to go wrong simultaneously. When you face serious illness, financial crisis, betrayal by someone you trusted, or the loss of something precious to you. These are the moments that separate philosophical theory from lived wisdom, where you discover whether you've truly internalized these principles or just understood them intellectually. Marcus Aurelius faced plague, war, betrayal, and personal loss. Seneca faced exile, political persecution, and eventually forced suicide. Epictetus faced slavery, disability, and social rejection. Yet all three maintained their inner peace and continued to teach others about wisdom and virtue. How? They had learned something that goes beyond mere technique or strategy. They had developed an unshakable understanding that their essential worth and happiness didn't depend on external circumstances. They had cultivated what the Stoics called the citadel of the self, an inner fortress that couldn't be touched by external events, no matter how devastating. This doesn't mean they felt no pain or sadness. They were fully human, with human emotions and attachments. But they had learned to distinguish between pain and suffering, between the natural human response to loss and the additional suffering we create through our resistance to reality and our demands that life be different than it is. The moment of truth, your moment of truth will come. Perhaps it already has. It might be a phone call with devastating news, a betrayal by someone you trusted completely, or the sudden loss of something you thought was permanent. In that moment, you'll discover whether you've truly absorbed these teachings or just collected interesting concepts. But here's what I want you to remember when that moment comes. Even if you don't respond perfectly, even if you're initially overwhelmed by emotion, you still have the power to choose what comes next. You can choose to let the crisis define you, or you can choose to let it refine you. You can choose to become bitter, or you can choose to become wise. You can choose to close your heart, or you can choose to let your suffering open it to greater compassion for others who suffer. The Stoics believed that every challenge contains within it the seeds of growth and wisdom, but only if we choose to plant those seeds through our response. Your most difficult moments can become your most transformative moments, but only if you approach them with the right understanding and attitude. This is why the daily practice matters so much. You can't develop inner strength only when you need it. You have to build it gradually, through consistent practice with smaller challenges. Every time you choose not to get angry about traffic, every time you respond with dignity to rudeness, every time you accept a disappointment with grace, you're building the inner resources you'll need when larger challenges arise. The call to action. Your journey begins now. We've covered profound territory together, but now comes the crucial moment, the point where you must decide whether these insights will remain interesting ideas or become the foundation for a transformed life. Because intellectual understanding without practical application is just sophisticated entertainment. The transformation from someone who is constantly triggered by others' behavior to someone who maintains inner peace regardless of external circumstances doesn't happen through a single moment of inspiration. It happens through consistent daily practice, through choosing wisdom over reactivity in countless small moments, through gradually building the mental and emotional muscles that allow you to remain centered when life becomes chaotic. Your journey begins with a simple but powerful commitment. For the next week, every time you feel anger or irritation rising, you'll pause long enough to remember that this feeling is coming from your interpretation of events, not from the events themselves. You'll ask yourself whether this situation deserves your precious mental energy, and you'll choose your response consciously rather than reacting automatically. I want to be completely honest with you. This isn't easy at first. Your brain has been conditioned for years or decades to respond to certain triggers with automatic anger. Changing these patterns requires patience, practice, and self-compassion when you don't respond perfectly. But every time you catch yourself and choose a wiser response, you're literally rewiring your brain and becoming a different kind of person. Join the community, but you don't have to do this alone. If you've made it this far in the video, you're clearly someone who values wisdom over comfort, growth over stagnation, and inner freedom over external validation. You're part of a special community of people who refuse to accept unnecessary suffering as inevitable. Here at Stoic Mentality, we're building a community of individuals committed to applying ancient wisdom to modern challenges. If these teachings have resonated with you, if you're ready to transform your relationship with anger and irritation, if you want to develop the inner strength that allows you to remain peaceful regardless of others' behavior, then I want to invite you to take the next step. First, if this video has provided you with value, if you can see how these principles could transform your life, please show your support by clicking the like button. This isn't just about supporting the channel. It's about declaring to yourself and the algorithm that you value content that promotes wisdom and personal growth over entertainment and drama. Second, and more importantly, subscribe to Stoic Mentality and hit the notification bell. Your transformation won't happen from watching one video, no matter how comprehensive it is. It happens through consistent exposure to these principles, regular reminders of what's possible, and ongoing inspiration from a community of like-minded individuals. When you subscribe, you're making a commitment to your own growth and